The rain had been falling for hours, a relentless rhythm that drowned the city in silver streaks, washing the streets into reflective rivers. I sat alone at the kitchen table of my apartment, fingers hovering over the cold mug of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink. Outside, neon signs flickered and blurred, their colors bleeding into the puddles along the curb. But inside, the only light came from the faint glow of the overhead bulb, casting shadows across my hollowed face. I was exhausted in a way that went beyond sleep. My bones ached with regret, my chest tight with guilt, and my mind throbbed with the constant replay of every word, every gesture, every failure I had committed against the two people I loved most in the world. I thought about my wife. How once, she had been the warmth of my life, the person who smiled at me even when the world was falling apart. She had a way of commanding attention without ever raising her voice, her presence steady and comforting, yet electric with intelligence. She was a CEO, yes, but to me, she was more, the anchor that had kept my drifting, aimless life tethered. And yet, over the months, I had been cruel without realizing it. Small jabs here, snide comments there, the way I would dismiss her concerns as unimportant, the way I allowed my pride to cloud every interaction. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, I had begun to erode the very foundation of our marriage. My son's face came into my mind, the little boy who used to run into my arms with unfiltered joy. Now, even a glance from me made him tense. His trust had been chipped away, brick, by the anger and selfishness I didn't even see until it was too late. The realization struck me like a lightning bolt. I had been the villain in our story. Not an external threat, not some tragic circumstance. I, with my own hands and words, had become the source of pain, fear, and distance in their lives. I stood up, restless, pacing the cramped apartment. The weight of my mistakes pressed down on me like an invisible chain. I thought leaving would make it easier for them, that my absence would shield them from my toxicity. But as I stepped into the night, the cold rain soaking through my coat and dripping into my shoes, I realized the opposite. Every step away from my family felt like stepping into quicksand. Every drop of rain that hit my face felt like a reminder of the cold, hollow space inside me. The streets were empty, or nearly so, save for a few umbrellas gliding through the shimmering puddles. The city's neon glow reflected off the water, painting the ground with pinks, blues, and yellows, but the colors seemed to mock me rather than comfort. I remembered the nights we had walked together under similar rains, my son tucked under my arm, my wife smiling despite the chill. Those nights had felt eternal, timeless. Now they were memories, fragile and sharp, slicing through me with unbearable clarity. I stopped at a street corner, head bowed, watching the reflections in the water twist and warp. Was this penance, or merely the beginning of something worse? I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't undo the past. I couldn't pull back the words, the harsh actions, the silent betrayals. I could only move forward, but even that was terrifying. As I walked aimlessly through the city, I tried to understand myself. Why had I been so blind? So foolish? Pride, fear, insecurity. The villain in me had been clever, convincing me that every outburst was justified, that my needs came first, that love could bend to accommodate my flaws. But now, standing alone in the rain, I understood the cruelest truth. Love cannot thrive in the presence of a villain. It demands courage, humility, and sacrifice, qualities I had neglected until the damage was nearly irreparable. By the time I returned to my apartment, hours had passed, and the rain had turned the streets into a glimmering mirror of my own despair. I sank into the couch, dripping wet, exhausted in body and spirit. I closed my eyes and saw her face, then my son's, over and over, each image stabbing me with guilt. And in that moment, I swore I would change. I didn't know how, or if it was even possible, but I knew I could no longer run from myself. The villain inside me had been revealed, naked and unflinching. Now, it was up to me to confront it. Outside, the rain continued to fall. But for the first time in months, amidst the cold and the sorrow, I felt a small spark, a fragile, trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, redemption was possible. The week that followed my self-imposed exile from home was a haze of gray monotony and restless wandering. Days bled into nights with no distinguishing features, and the world around me became a blur of faces and sounds I barely noticed. My apartment, empty, unwelcoming, felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. I slept fitfully on a thin mattress that sagged in the middle, haunted by dreams I couldn't fully remember but that left me drenched in sweat and trembling. Every sound, raindrops tapping the window, distant car horns, the hum of streetlights, felt amplified, a relentless reminder of the emptiness I had created around myself. Work was no refuge. The office, usually a place of focus and accomplishment, had become a theater of alienation. Colleagues waved as they passed by my cubicle, but their words felt like echoes from another life. I responded with a nod, a murmur, or sometimes not at all. My mind was consumed with memory and regret. The day I snapped at her for something trivial, the time I ignored my son's plea to play, the evenings I spent lost in self-pity instead of building the life I claimed to care about. Every recollection was a hammer blow to the chest, and yet, even as I relived these moments, I couldn't change them. One evening, seeking refuge from the suffocating pressure of my own thoughts, I wandered aimlessly through the city streets, my coat soaked from the relentless drizzle. I ducked into a small cafe tucked away between high-rise buildings, a place I had never noticed before. The sign read simply, Café Lumière, and inside, the warm golden glow of vintage lamps bathed the wooden interior in a comforting embrace. The smell of roasted coffee beans mingled with the faint scent of baked bread, and for the first time in days, I felt the faintest pull toward peace. I chose a corner table, one shadowed enough to let me vanish from view. I picked up the menu, but the words blurred as my thoughts spiraled. I hadn't eaten properly in days. I hadn't spoken much to anyone either, not really. The isolation I had sought now felt suffocating, and yet I could not summon the courage to reconnect. Not with her, not with my son, not with anyone. Then he appeared, a man in his mid-30s, wearing a slightly rumpled suit, slid into the seat across from me. His eyes were sharp, penetrating, yet calm, like he could see every secret buried in my heart. "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders," he said, voice low but clear, almost a statement rather than a question. I blinked at him, unsure if I should respond. "You, what?" My voice cracked, rusty from disuse. "You're heavy with guilt," he said. "I can see it in your eyes. And you're trying to hide from it, pretending the world is fine, pretending your mistakes aren't suffocating you. But you can't run forever." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You have no idea." "Maybe I do," he replied, leaning back in his chair. "Maybe we all carry monsters we refuse to face. Some of us call them regret, some of us call them pride. The question is, can you confront yours before it destroys everything you love?" His words hit me like a hammer to the chest. I wanted to run, to shake my head, to tell him to leave me alone. But instead, I felt a lump in my throat, my chest tight. I had been running, hiding behind my own excuses, convincing myself that absence was protection, that time alone would somehow repair the damage I had inflicted. But now, hearing it spoken aloud, I realized how foolish I had been. I wanted to tell him everything, to spill my guilt, my shame, my failures, my love for the family I had abandoned. But I only sat there, silent, letting the weight of his words settle over me. Outside, the rain continued, tapping against the windows, blurring the lights into a dreamlike haze. Inside, I felt the first stirrings of awareness, the beginning of understanding, that running away was never the solution. Hours passed without my noticing. I watched couples laugh across the cafe, friends whisper to each other in shared confidence, strangers reading quietly in corners. The warmth of human connection was almost painful. I had severed myself from it entirely. I thought I could cope with solitude, but now I felt the emptiness like a physical wound, throbbing and relentless. When I finally left, the streets were slick with rain, neon reflections painting the asphalt in wild colors. Every puddle mirrored not just the city, but my own fractured soul. I wandered without direction, letting my feet carry me wherever they wished. The conversation with the stranger, the man whose eyes had pierced through my defenses, replayed endlessly in my mind. Can you confront your monster before it destroys everything you love? And that was when the first glimmer of fear struck me. The villain inside me had been revealed, not by her anger or my son's distance, but by my own reflection, by the merciless clarity of conscience. I had thought that absence would shield them. I had believed I could atone silently, without facing the raw, painful truth of my actions. But I was wrong. The twist, though, had not yet arrived. I didn't know it then, but the life I had left behind, the cold wife, the distant son, the house that had once been warm and full of laughter, was already moving in ways I couldn't see. The small message, the glimmer of hope, the test of my character, they were all in motion. And soon, everything I thought I understood about my failures, my guilt, and my role as the villain would be challenged in ways that would crush and rebuild me at the same time. I finally returned to my apartment in the early hours, drenched, exhausted, and yet strangely awake. My mind spun with possibilities, each one terrifying and exhilarating. I had been running, hiding from my own darkness, but now I understood. The only way to survive it, the only way to reclaim my life, was to face it. Fully, brutally, without excuses. I sank onto the couch, shivering, letting the rain-soaked coat drip around me, and closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt the fragile stirrings of resolve. The villain within me had been exposed. But maybe, just maybe, the man beneath him could still rise. And that was when my phone buzzed. A single message, a photo, a glimpse of my son, smiling under the golden glow of a late afternoon sun, holding a drawing of a tree with his tiny hands. No words, just a message from her. My heart lurched painfully, sharply, painfully alive again. That small image was a lifeline thrown into the ocean of my despair. But the twist, the real challenge, was yet to come. What she had set in motion, silently and patiently, would test me in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The next morning, I awoke to a sky smeared with gray clouds, the rain having softened to a gentle drizzle that tapped against the window like distant fingers. My apartment felt colder than usual, the silence oppressive, but there was a tremor of anticipation I couldn't shake. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. Hours passed, then minutes, each one heavier than the last, until a single notification finally lit up the screen. It was from her, a photo, my son, smiling, beaming, holding up a drawing of a tree beneath a golden sun. His small fingers had curled around the edges of the paper, smudges of crayon still marking the lines of his tiny hands. His eyes sparkled with pure, unguarded joy, the kind of joy that used to be reserved exclusively for me before my foolishness had chipped away at our bond. There were no words, just the image. My chest tightened, and my fingers trembled as I scrolled through it again and again. The sight of him, so alive, so unspoiled by my failures, pierced me deeper than any reprimand or cold glance ever could. I felt a mix of pride, longing, and a searing guilt that burned hotter than I thought possible. My own mistakes, my own villainy, had created a chasm between us that seemed insurmountable. And yet, in that one photograph, I glimpsed the first thread of connection still intact, fragile but undeniable. I tried to respond, typed I miss him and erased it, typed I love him and deleted it. Each attempt felt pathetically inadequate, a poor substitute for the years I had lost, for the trust I had shattered. I didn't know if she would accept my words, if he would believe them, or if the gap I had created was now too vast to bridge. Days passed, and still, she sent nothing further. The silence was deafening, each hour stretching into an eternity. I oscillated between hope and despair, each emotion feeding the other in a relentless loop. Then, one evening, driven by a mix of desperation and reckless courage, I found myself standing outside our apartment building. My hand trembled as it hovered over the doorbell, indecision tearing at me. Would she open it? Would he even remember me as someone safe? Would the sight of me reignite fear instead of love? I pressed the button anyway. The door opened, and there she was, my wife. Her posture was straight, commanding, yet there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't completely vanished. She studied me for a long, piercing moment before speaking. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice steady but calm, not unkind but firm enough to remind me of the distance I had created. I needed to see him," I stammered. My words sounded hollow even to me, but they carried the raw weight of truth. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in assessment. "You hurt us," she said finally, her voice deliberate. "Do you realize how deep the damage goes?" "I do," I whispered. I was the villain. I know it now. I was wrong. Words failed me. How could I summarize years of mistakes in one breath? How could I convey the endless nights of guilt, the hours spent replaying our happiest memories only to wonder if I had ruined them forever? For a moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, she stepped aside. My heart raced as I entered the apartment, and immediately, I saw him. My son. He ran toward me with hesitant steps, arms outstretched but pausing mid-motion. His eyes, wide and searching, seemed to question me silently. Is this really you? Can I trust you again? I knelt down slowly, hands open, trying to convey everything words could not. It's me, buddy, I whispered. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. He took a tentative step forward, then another, until finally, the distance closed and he threw himself into my arms. The embrace was brief, fragile, but enough to send a wave of emotion through me that left me trembling. I held him tighter than I ever had, letting him feel the safety and presence I had failed to provide for so long. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, the world outside fading into irrelevance. And yet, even in this moment of reunion, there was an undercurrent of tension. I sensed that she was watching me, measuring my every action, waiting to see if I was capable of more than remorse, that I could become the man my son needed, the man she had hoped I could be. Later that evening, after putting him to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the muted glow of the television. Silence surrounded me, but it no longer felt like emptiness, it felt like the pause before a reckoning. And that's when I discovered it. My son's tablet, abandoned on the couch, glowed faintly in the dim light. Curiosity overcame caution, and I picked it up. There, waiting for me, was a video. I pressed play. The footage was raw, unpolished. My son, shy at first, stared into the camera. "Hi, Daddy," he said softly. His voice trembled, small and uncertain, yet filled with something I hadn't heard in months: hope. "I know you're sorry. I forgive you. But, Mom says I have to tell you something." My pulse quickened. "What?" I whispered aloud, though no one was there. He continued, "Mom says she has to leave for work. For a long time. She wants you to take care of me while she's gone. But, she says you should know something before she goes. Daddy, you're not just forgiven. You're needed." The words crashed into me like a tidal wave. Forgiveness I could bear, but the revelation that followed shattered my fragile composure. My wife, the woman I had distanced myself from, had been orchestrating a plan, not to punish me, not to shut me out, but to give me a chance to step up, to prove myself as a father, as a man capable of love and responsibility. She had seen the villain in me. She had seen my failures. And yet, she had not given up. The twist hit me harder than anything I could have imagined. My absence, which I had assumed protected her and our son from my toxicity, had in fact been part of a test I didn't even know I was taking. The woman I had believed cold and unforgiving had been quietly watching, guiding, trusting me to rise to the challenge I had long ignored. I sank to the couch, trembling, staring at the small device in my hands. My son's words echoed endlessly: "You're not just forgiven. You're needed." For the first time in months, I understood the depth of their love, the resilience of their faith in me, and the scale of the challenge that lay ahead. Redemption was not offered lightly. It had to be earned. And that was when the fear began to creep in. The fear that I could still fail, that the villain in me could re-emerge at the worst possible moment, that my son's fragile trust could shatter again. But beneath that fear was something stronger. A burning resolve, a raw determination to prove, in every action, that I was more than my mistakes. I didn't yet know what the days ahead would hold, but one thing was clear: the path to reclaiming my family would be fraught with tests, challenges, and revelations I could not anticipate. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows of our carefully constructed lives, the ultimate plot twist, the one that would crush me and redefine everything, was already in motion. I held the tablet close, feeling the weight of responsibility, the surge of love, and the sting of guilt all at once. The villain in me had been exposed. Now, it was time to begin the journey toward becoming the man they needed. The days that followed were a mixture of tentative joy and raw anxiety. I had returned home, but home no longer felt like mine. It was a space shared, observed, tested. My son clung to me with a mixture of affection and caution, as though unsure if the man holding him was truly the one who had abandoned him. My wife, ever composed, orchestrated the household with quiet precision, giving me responsibilities that tested my patience, my judgment, and my willingness to change. The first morning, she handed me the small checklist she had written: meals, homework, bedtime routines, playtime activities, and even moments for conversations about feelings. I glanced at it, overwhelmed, the list feeling longer than any work project I had ever tackled. "Do you think I can do this?" I asked quietly, almost to myself. "You don't have a choice," she replied gently, her eyes locking with mine. "You will either rise to this, or your son will grow up believing that absence and failure are all he can expect from you." Her words struck me harder than any accusation. She wasn't angry, she wasn't scolding. She was laying the truth bare. Responsibility wasn't negotiable. Love wasn't abstract, and my failures had consequences that went far beyond my own shame. The first week was brutal. I stumbled over bedtime routines, misread homework instructions, and failed to cook the meals she had outlined. My son's patience, merciful as it was, sometimes broke, and I found myself facing tears and questions I didn't have the answers to. "Why did you leave, Daddy?" he asked one night, voice trembling. The question landed like a hammer. I wanted to explain, to justify, to apologize endlessly, but I realized that words alone were not enough. He needed my actions. He needed presence. I made mistakes, I said finally, voice heavy with regret. But I'm here now, and I promise I will do better. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if testing my sincerity. That night, as I watched him fall asleep, I felt the first flicker of connection rebuilding. But it was fragile, and I knew it could shatter at the slightest misstep. Amidst this domestic chaos, I also had to confront myself. I could no longer hide behind the mask of the villain. I had to acknowledge every flaw, every wrong, and take tangible steps to repair them. I began keeping a journal, writing down each mistake, each success, each interaction with my son and wife, analyzing my behavior with brutal honesty. Some nights, I cried myself to sleep, overwhelmed by the weight of my past and the enormity of the responsibility now placed squarely on my shoulders. Then came the first test of her plan. One evening, she informed me that she would be away on a business trip for several days. "You're on your own," she said, handing me a folder with instructions, emergency contacts, and a list of scheduled activities. "No calling me for help unless it's truly an emergency. I need to see if you can handle this." My stomach sank. The prospect terrified me, but beneath the fear was a deep-seated determination. This was my chance to prove that I could rise above my villainy, that I could be a father, a partner, someone worthy of their trust. The first day alone was chaos. Breakfast spilled, homework went unfinished, and at one point, my son nearly slipped on the bathroom floor. I held him tight, apologizing between frantic breaths, and realized that this was more than parenting. It was vigilance, empathy, patience, and courage all wrapped into one. By nightfall, we both collapsed on the couch, exhausted and laughing softly at the disasters of the day. It was the first real bonding we had shared in months, the laughter mingling with relief and pride. But just as I felt a fragile confidence building, the plot twist hit. While helping him with a drawing assignment, I noticed a letter slipped under the tablet screen. It wasn't addressed to me, it was addressed to my son, in my wife's neat handwriting. Curiosity won, and I opened it. The letter revealed a truth I wasn't prepared for. My wife had been documenting everything, my absences, my anger, my moments of cruelty, not out of malice, but as a record of my failures and growth. She intended to share this with my son one day, to show both the consequences of neglect and the power of redemption. My heart ached at the realization that everything I did now was being scrutinized, evaluated, judged, not just by her, but by my son. The knowledge was crushing. Every mistake I had made in the past came rushing back, mingled with the pressure of proving myself worthy now. I felt like I was walking a tightrope over an abyss, every misstep threatening to plunge me back into guilt and failure. Yet, amidst the pressure and fear, I also felt a profound awakening. This wasn't punishment, it was guidance. My wife's strategy, subtle and unrelenting, was designed to force me to confront my villainy, to take responsibility in a way that words or apologies never could. The stakes were higher than ever, but so was the opportunity. That night, after putting my son to bed, I sat in the living room, the letter clutched in my hands. The city outside shimmered with lights reflected in puddles from the day's drizzle, mirroring the storm of emotions inside me. I realized that redemption was not a single act. It was a continuum of choices, of courage, of facing one's worst self every day and deciding to rise above it. And for the first time, I truly understood the magnitude of what lay ahead. The villain in me was not just an abstract idea anymore. He was tangible, present, and ready to undo everything I had worked to repair. But I also felt a flicker of something stronger. The burning determination to be more than my mistakes, to earn the love and trust that I had squandered. The journey would be long. The tests would be cruel. The twists, hidden, waiting, inevitable, would crush me in ways I could not yet foresee. But I knew one truth. I could no longer run from myself. And as I stared into the darkened city beyond the window, I whispered a vow I meant to keep: I will not fail them again. The week of solitary parenting had been grueling, yet strangely illuminating. My son and I had begun to find a rhythm, fragile but undeniable, like two dancers learning the steps of a choreography long forgotten. Each morning, I prepared breakfast with trembling hands, making sure not to burn the eggs or spill the juice. Each afternoon, we sat together on the living room floor, puzzles and drawings strewn around us, laughter threading through our tentative conversations. I felt a spark of connection I hadn't experienced in months, a fragile bridge between the villain I had been and the father I was striving to become. And then it happened. It was a Wednesday evening, the air heavy with humidity from a lingering storm. My son had just finished a drawing, proudly holding it up for me to see, a chaotic mix of colors depicting a sun, a house, and what I assumed was our family. I smiled, genuine for the first time in what felt like years. "That's amazing, buddy. You're getting really good at this," I said, ruffling his damp hair. He smiled, but there was a hesitation I hadn't noticed before, a flicker of unease in his eyes. Before I could ask, my wife's voice cut through the apartment, crisp and commanding, though unusually distant. "Hanif, come to the study. Now." My stomach sank. That tone, authoritative, calm, unyielding, was familiar, but its timing here felt deliberate. I set my son down, concern knotting in my chest. My son looked at me, wide-eyed, as though sensing that this wasn't just another small correction or routine. He stayed close as I followed her to the study. The door closed behind me, and suddenly, I was in the middle of a confrontation I hadn't anticipated. Papers, charts, and legal documents were spread across the desk, but it wasn't the paperwork that sent my heart racing. It was her. She was standing straight, hands on the desk, eyes locking on mine with a piercing intensity. "Your son," she began, voice steady, "is scheduled to go on a school trip next week. I was going to handle the arrangements, but now it's your responsibility. You will book the transport, prepare him for the trip, and ensure he's ready for every activity. No help from me, no excuses." I swallowed hard. I can do that," I said, though my voice wavered. I had managed the days at home, but this was new territory. The stakes were higher, and the consequences of failure were not just emotional, but logistical, practical, unavoidable. She continued, "But there's more. Your son needs to experience independence, but also the consequences of trust. I have arranged for a surprise evaluation of your responsibility. If you fail," she paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air, "it won't just affect you. It will affect him, and I need to see whether you are truly capable of stepping up, beyond apologies and promises." I felt my chest tighten. Every nerve in my body screamed with fear, yet a small, stubborn part of me, one that had survived months of self-reckoning, held firm. "I'll do it," I whispered, though the words felt fragile against the enormity of what she had laid before me. The next days were a whirlwind. I booked transportation, coordinated packing lists, checked every activity schedule, and rehearsed conversations about responsibility, safety, and behavior. Every task was a test, every misstep a potential failure. And through it all, my son watched me. His trust was fragile, his eyes observant, measuring every action, every word. On the morning of the trip, as we stood outside the school bus, the twist revealed itself fully. My wife approached, dressed sharply, a small, enigmatic smile on her face. "There's one more thing," she said, handing me an envelope. "Inside are instructions for the day. Follow them exactly. Any deviation," her gaze sharpened, "and you'll see the consequences firsthand." I opened it, and my heart stopped. The instructions were elaborate, specific, and unforgiving. Any mistake, forgetting an item, mismanaging the schedule, failing to address a behavioral issue, would trigger a chain of events that could humiliate me in front of the school staff and, worse, frighten or upset my son. The test was no longer theoretical, it was immediate, high stakes, and terrifying. As the bus pulled away, I gripped my son's hand tightly, feeling the pressure of his tiny fingers against mine. "We've got this," I whispered. My son nodded, though I sensed the tension in his posture. He trusted me, but he also knew the stakes. The day was relentless. Every hour brought a new challenge. A lost backpack, a misunderstanding with another parent, a miscommunication with a teacher. I navigated each one with trembling resolve, sweat on my brow, and an unyielding focus on keeping my son safe and happy. Every decision weighed heavily, each minor success balanced precariously against the potential for disaster. By evening, as the bus returned, exhausted parents and children spilling out into the parking lot, I felt both triumph and terror. I had survived the test, navigated every twist, and my son was smiling, laughing, holding his small bag with pride. But as I looked up, my wife was watching from a distance, her expression unreadable. Pride, satisfaction, judgment, I couldn't tell. Later that night, at home, my son climbed into bed, eyes wide with excitement and exhaustion. "Daddy, we did it, right? We handled everything," he asked softly. I held him close. "Yes, buddy, we did, and I'm proud of you." But deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. The test, the twist, the revelation of my villainy and the necessity of redemption, these were far from over. The plot was moving, hidden layers yet to unfold, challenges yet to appear. My wife's trust was conditional, fragile, and observant, and any misstep could undo the fragile progress we had made. That night, lying awake beside the silent apartment, I realized something chilling. My redemption would not come from grand gestures alone. It would come from endurance, vigilance, courage, and the unwavering commitment to confront the villain in me every single day. And somewhere in the shadows, I sensed that the ultimate twist, the one that would crush me utterly, was already being prepared, silently, patiently, ready to strike when I least expected it. For the first time, I understood the depth of the challenge. I wasn't just fighting for my son's trust or my wife's respect. I was fighting to reclaim my own soul from the villain I had once been. And the realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. The days after the school trip felt deceptively calm. My son was cheerful, chatting incessantly about the games he played, the friends he made, and the small victories of the day. I smiled, nodded, and laughed when appropriate, but beneath the surface, a storm raged inside me. I knew the calm was temporary. My wife's tests were far from over. Her patience was surgical, her strategy precise. Every smile from my son, every approving glance from her, carried with it the weight of observation. One evening, as I was putting my son to bed, he hesitated by the door. "Daddy, can we talk?" he asked softly. His eyes, wide and earnest, held a depth that startled me. "Of course, buddy," I replied, heart tightening. He climbed into bed, tugged the blanket close, and looked at me. I like it when you play with me. And I like it when you read stories. But sometimes, you get mad. Really mad. And it scares me." I froze. His words were small, simple, but they cut through me like glass. I had tried to contain my anger, to restrain the villain inside me, but here it was, reflected in the terrified honesty of my son. My chest tightened, and I swallowed hard, forcing back the guilt that threatened to overwhelm me. I'm sorry, buddy," I said, my voice breaking. "I never want to scare you. I promise I'll do better. I'm working on it, every day." He nodded, eyes glistening. "Okay, I believe you." I held him for a long time, feeling the fragility of trust, the delicate thread of connection I had begun to rebuild. And yet, deep inside, I knew the tests were far from over. The next morning brought the first real challenge since the trip. A call came from the school. My son had forgotten an important project due for the day's class presentation. Panic surged through me. I grabbed his bag, his notebooks, anything that might help, and raced to the school, adrenaline and fear mingling into a sharp, almost physical ache. I arrived breathless, facing a teacher who raised an eyebrow at my disheveled appearance. I'm sorry," I stammered. "There's been a mistake. He needs to present today." The teacher sighed, but allowed us a last-minute slot. My son, wide-eyed and anxious, followed me to the front of the classroom. I whispered encouragement, my heart hammering with the fear that my failure would undo all progress. But he did it. He presented with confidence, and the class applauded. Relief flooded me, almost overwhelming in its intensity. Yet that evening, at home, my wife's expression was unreadable. "You handled today," she said softly. "But you nearly failed. You see, Hanif, redemption isn't a series of lucky recoveries. It's consistency. It's vigilance. It's the ability to face the villain within, even when no one is watching." Her words, calm but merciless, struck me harder than any confrontation, any punishment. I felt the weight of the villain inside me pressing against my chest, urging me to snap, to escape, to avoid responsibility. And for a terrifying moment, I almost did. The rage, the self-loathing, the fear, everything I had tried to suppress, threatened to surface. But then I looked at my son, asleep in the other room, and something shifted. The anger, the despair, the fear, they didn't vanish, but they were tempered by love, by the sheer necessity of being the man my son needed. I realized that the villain in me wasn't just a memory of the past. It was a living, breathing part of me, always lurking, always ready to destroy what I loved. Over the next few days, my wife introduced more challenges, subtle, yet precise. Tasks designed to test my patience, my empathy, my ability to put my son's needs above my own. Each small failure, each near mistake, was a reminder that redemption wasn't a destination, it was a daily choice, a continuous battle against the darker parts of myself. And then, the twist came. One evening, as I returned home after a long day of work and child rearing, I found the apartment eerily quiet. My wife was not in the living room. My son's toys lay scattered, but there was an unusual note on the table, written in her unmistakable handwriting. "Hanif, the ultimate test begins tonight. Trust no one. Observe everything. Your choices will define your role in this family, forever." A chill ran down my spine. The words were simple, but their implications were terrifying. My wife had orchestrated this moment to push me to the edge, to test not just my love, but my character, my ability to confront fear, temptation, and my own inner villain. The rules were unclear, the consequences unknown, and yet the expectation was absolute: succeed or fail completely. That night, I watched my son sleep, aware that every movement, every decision I made, carried weight far beyond what I could imagine. The villain inside me stirred, whispering doubts, urging avoidance, tempting me with old habits of detachment and apathy. I clenched my fists, drawing strength from the fragile trust of my child and the silent, unwavering observation of my wife. I realized then the truth. The final challenge was not just about parenting. It was about facing every failure, every dark impulse, every flaw I had ever harbored, and choosing, every single moment, to rise above them. The villain in me would not disappear. He would always exist, but I could define whether he controlled me, or whether I controlled him. As I sat in the quiet, watching shadows stretch across the room, I understood that the moment of reckoning was approaching. The ultimate twist, the one my wife had quietly prepared, the one that would test the limits of my love, my courage, and my soul, was near. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that failure this time would not just hurt me. It would crush everything I had fought to reclaim: my son's trust, my wife's faith, and the man I had desperately hoped to become. It was the quiet before a storm. The apartment felt heavier than usual, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes every breath feel measured, every sound magnified. My son was asleep, tucked under his blanket, yet even in the softness of his breathing, I felt the weight of anticipation. I knew something was coming. I could feel it in every corner of the room, every flicker of shadow. The knock on the door came suddenly, sharp, slicing through the stillness. My heart leapt into my throat. I opened the door. My wife stood there, composed as ever, but her eyes held an intensity I had never seen. "Hanif," she said softly, "tonight's test begins." I nodded, swallowing hard, though fear and dread knotted in my stomach. I didn't yet know what the test was, only that it would demand every ounce of my courage, patience, and restraint. She stepped aside, and then I saw it. My son, sitting on the floor, clutching a tablet, his small face pale, eyes wide with something between fear and confusion. My chest tightened. What's happening?" I asked, my voice trembling. This, she said, is the ultimate evaluation. You must handle it alone. Before I could respond, she pressed play on a video she had set up earlier. The footage was shocking. My son appeared on the screen, speaking in a voice that sounded like him but wasn't. It was distorted, manipulated. "Daddy, I don't trust you anymore," the voice said. "You're the villain. You hurt me. You're leaving again, aren't you?" I froze, every instinct screaming to protect him, to reassure him, to fix it immediately. My stomach churned. This wasn't real, was it? But then I saw the subtle movements, the gestures, the way he looked at me from the screen, my son. And the truth hit me. This was my wife's test, a psychological gauntlet designed to push me to the edge. I swallowed hard and knelt beside him. "Buddy, look at me," I whispered. His eyes met mine, uncertainty shining in their depths. "I'm right here. I'm not leaving. I'm not going anywhere. And I will prove it to you, every single day, if I have to." He hesitated, small hands gripping mine. I felt his doubt, his fear, and my heart broke in 1,000 pieces. I wanted to vanish, to fix everything in an instant, to undo all my past mistakes. But I realized that this was the ultimate challenge. To stay grounded, to respond with love, patience, and truth rather than fear or guilt. Hours passed. The test escalated. My wife had orchestrated situations to provoke, confuse, and challenge me. Alarms that required rapid problem solving, tasks that forced me to make moral choices, scenarios that tested my patience, empathy, and control. Every time I faltered, a bell rang, and the screen would flash a message: villain or father. I almost lost control at one point. A scenario where my son's toy broke, deliberately rigged, I realized, threatened to unleash the old me: anger, blame, excuses. But then I saw him, wide-eyed and nervous, and something shifted. I inhaled, closed my eyes, and made the conscious choice to respond with calm, kindness, and problem-solving. My hands shook, sweat beaded on my forehead, but I maintained my composure. Hours turned into a night-long ordeal. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally, yet I kept going, each decision deliberate, each act of care intentional. And then came the final segment. The screen went black. Silence. My son sat on the floor, eyes locked on mine. My wife's voice came softly from behind me. "Hanif, this is real. Your son's trust is real. Your actions tonight determine everything. Choose wisely." My heart lurched. I realized then what the ultimate twist was. The test was not about tasks, rules, or schedules. It was about me, the villain I had been versus the father I could become. Every mistake I had made, every moment I had doubted myself, every ounce of guilt I had carried, it all converged here. And the stakes were higher than anything I could have imagined. If I failed, I wouldn't just lose my son's trust, I would lose the chance to redeem my soul. I knelt beside him, took both his hands, and looked deep into his eyes. "Buddy, I know I've hurt you. I know I've failed before. But I'm here now, and I will never leave your side. I will not be the villain. I will be the father you need me to be. I promise." Tears streamed down his cheeks. "Really?" he whispered, voice small, fragile, yet filled with hope. "Really?" I said, my voice breaking. I hugged him tightly, feeling the weight of my past dissolve, replaced by a raw, unfiltered determination to protect him, love him, and earn his trust every day from this moment forward. My wife stepped forward, a smile breaking through her composed exterior. "You've passed," she said softly. "Not because the test was easy, but because you chose love, patience, and truth over fear, anger, and guilt. The villain inside you still exists, but you have shown him that he no longer controls you." I sank to my knees, overwhelmed, exhausted, and filled with an indescribable mix of relief, gratitude, and lingering guilt. My son hugged me tightly, and for the first time in months, I felt whole, not because my past was erased, but because I had faced it, and chosen to rise above it. And as we sat there, holding each other, the ultimate realization hit me. The plot twist had crushed me, not to punish, but to awaken. It forced me to confront every dark part of myself, to fight for love and trust, and to emerge, trembling but stronger, on the other side. I had been the villain. I had hurt them. I had almost lost everything. But in the end, love, courage, and relentless determination had triumphed. not as grand gestures, but as the quiet, persistent choice to be better every single day. And that choice, fragile as it was, had changed everything. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting golden streaks across the living room. For the first time in months, the apartment felt alive, not tense, not scrutinized, but alive with quiet warmth. My son was awake early, as usual, bouncing into the kitchen with that innocent enthusiasm that had always carried the power to soften even the heaviest guilt. "Daddy," he shouted, arms flailing. "Look what I made." He held up a simple drawing, but to me, it was monumental. A picture of the three of us, my son, my wife, and me, standing together, smiling, hand in hand. There was no chaos, no distortion, only connection, trust, and love. My chest tightened as I bent down to hug him. "I love it, buddy. It's perfect," I said, voice thick with emotion. He hugged me back, and in that embrace, I felt the cumulative weight of everything, the mistakes, the pain, the tests, the sleepless nights, the near despair. And yet, in that very same moment, I felt something else, hope. Real, fragile, breathtaking hope. Later that morning, my wife joined us in the kitchen. She moved quietly, watching as our son recounted his plans for the day. When she looked at me, there was no judgment, no challenge, only a soft acknowledgement, a recognition of the long, difficult journey I had undertaken, and the man I was striving to become. "You've changed," she said simply, voice calm but warm. "Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to prove you're willing to fight for them." I nodded, feeling a swell of emotion I could barely contain. I will never stop trying," I whispered. "I want them to know they can trust me. Always." She studied me for a long moment, and then, with a faint, approving smile, she said, "Actions speak louder than words, Hanif. And you've shown them, more than I ever could have expected." The rest of the day unfolded in gentle, perfect rhythm. We played games, prepared a meal together, and laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in what felt like forever. The air between us, once taut with fear and resentment, had softened into something richer, more enduring. Love, trust, and understanding were slowly rebuilding, brick by brick. That evening, as the city lights shimmered outside, my son curled up beside me on the couch. "Daddy, do you think I can trust you now?" he asked quietly, eyes searching mine. I held him close, feeling his heartbeat against mine. "Yes, buddy," I said firmly, yet tenderly. "You can always trust me. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." He smiled, relief and joy mingling on his small face. And for the first time in months, I felt a weight lift from my chest, the weight of guilt, of shame, of the villain I had once been. I was still flawed, still human, but in that moment, I was also redeemed. Not by grand gestures or declarations, but by persistence, courage, and the quiet, relentless choice to be better. Later that night, after putting our son to bed, my wife and I sat together in the living room. The city stretched beyond the windows, a tapestry of lights and shadows, mirroring the journey we had taken, the darkness of mistakes, the brilliance of love, and the uncertain beauty of second chances. "I know it won't be perfect," I said softly. "I know I'll still stumble. But I'm not the same man who walked away. I've learned what it means to love, to take responsibility, to face myself. And I will keep learning. Every day." She reached out, taking my hand in hers. "I know," she replied, voice gentle but unwavering. "And that is enough. Redemption isn't about perfection. It's about persistence, courage, and love. You've shown all three." We sat in silence for a long moment, holding hands, the distance between us finally bridged by understanding, forgiveness, and commitment. As I looked over at my son, sleeping peacefully, I realized something profound. The villain I had been would always be a part of me, a shadow lurking in the corners of my mind. But he no longer defined me. Love, trust, and action now did. And in that realization, I found a peace I had not thought possible, a hope I had almost given up on, and a determination to be the father and husband they deserved, every single day, for the rest of my life. The journey had been harrowing, the tests relentless, the plot twists cruel, but in the end, love had triumphed. The villain had been confronted, the family rebuilt, and the bonds of trust reforged stronger than ever. And as I closed my eyes that night, finally able to breathe without fear, I whispered a vow into the quiet darkness, I will never fail them again. And for the first time, I truly believed it.